Oh, hey guys, sorry, I was jamming out to He Is We. Well, this video is a continuation of my writing methods series. It is four, you guys, four. I think that's right. I hope that's right. Otherwise, I'm really bad at math and really bad at remembering. Anyway, what we've already covered is 1. Begin with what inspired you. 2. Story goal, voice, style, location, and characters. 3. Basic plot design, which, if you don't remember, is intro, inciting incident, rise in action, climax, following action and resolution. 4. Different types of endings. And now we will be getting into scene by scene, plot details, and subplots. So don't freak out if you're a pantser and you just write the story like straight off the bat, right from your inspiration. I'm not going to force you to write a detailed plot design. The other stuff I mentioned before, like about story goal and actually knowing what your climax and your ending is going to be, is super important, even for a pantser. Don't argue with me on this. I know, because I have so many half-finished novels that I never finished because I pantsed through them and couldn't finish them because I didn't know where I was going. So, don't worry, you don't have to write a full outline or anything like that. This is just what I like to do and some suggestions that other people do, so bear with me. Okay. Firstly, now that you have the basic idea of your story, this is assuming you already went through and looked at like your climax and your ending and all of that. What is the point of your story, and who are you trying to reach? This is probably the biggest point when you're writing a story, specifically if you are writing it for the purpose of publishing it. If you don't write for your audience won't be able to accept your meaning. And no matter what you might think, every story has a meaning. Even the most silly, mundane stories have meanings. And so, when you look back at like how your story goes from the beginning to the middle to the climax to the end, you should see what sort of meaning and action that kind of calls for. Like, why are you writing the story, and what do you want people to see when they read it? So, like, for example, The Home of Our Hearts, the dedication says that it is for anyone who has ever felt unworthy, for anyone who has ever struggled with feeling unloved. And the goal of the book is that God says it's not the end. You are blessed, you are loved, and, my favorite part, while you might not get a prince, you could still end up with a cowboy. So as you can see, the whole purpose of the book is kind of a hope and a letting go of the past and all of that. So that's actually my dedication in the beginning of the book. But that sort of personifies my meaning of the whole book, so that going into it, my readers can see what I'm talking about. You don't have to use your excuse me. You don't have to use your dedication that way. That's just what I prefer to do because it gives me sort of a handle on how to do my dedications. So then, once you kind of figure out what the point of your story is, even if it's just like a story for yourself, where you wrote it because you needed it, then that's perfectly cool. You're basically writing for people similar to you, or who have gone through similar situations as you. And so your point of the story could be exactly how it helped you while you were writing it, or you when you thought of it. So, once you decide your audience and what the point of your story is, you should ask how you can show that by detailing your story and like with scenes and all that kind of thing. So what I do is what I read online that was suggested is to go through and detail what each scene is going to contain. So, like, for example, like, say you do a day-by-day sort of deal, where it's like, this day, these things happen, or this day, these things happen. Well, right now, when I'm working through Mr. Arnold Brunch, since it's kind of a complicated storyline, what I ended up doing was in this chapter this happens, and in this chapter this happens. But during like the meatiest part of the story, I did it day by day, since the meatiest part of the story is only contained in a week's time. So that just depends on kind of like how you want to work it, but you should pick scenes and story points and descriptions that derive from your meaning. Your meaning should make it a whole lot easier to decide what you put in your story. Whether it be like a full scene or something a character says or anything like that, your meaning should have an impact on every single thing you put in your story. Which also, by the way, is a great thing to understand in your editing. This is like side note, but it's really cool. I actually realized this not very long ago, like this week, while I was editing Mr. Arnold's Bunch, is I realized that there were some things in it that did not fit with my meaning of the story and what I wanted to portray. And so when things don't fit, you take them out or you change them. And when they do fit, you know that they work. And if they kind of fit but don't really, or they're too broad or too narrow, you can tighten them up to fit correctly. It's kind of like when you're defining a word, you want it to mean exactly what you're talking about. You don't want to confuse the person by saying, like, a table is something with 4 legs, because they could think you're talking about a horse. And so you want to be not too broad, not too narrow, but directly to the point, in a way that's proseful and descriptive and evokes emotion in people. So, next, you need to, when you're doing the detailed plot, you need to connect scenes to each other and to their meaning. So we just worked on, like, connecting them to their meaning and making sure all of it fits together as one solid meaning and one solid conclusion that your readers come to. And then, in that case, that means now you need to connect the scenes to each other. You can't just have a whole bunch of random, like, scenes dispersed through pages and pages of the book. It doesn't work out that way, obviously. If you read a book like that, you'd be very confused. So, what you need to do is start wherever in the story you feel is the central theme. That means you can start in the beginning, you can start in the middle, you can start at the climax, you can start at the falling action. Anywhere in the story where you feel you have the most grounded understanding of what's happening, and then work outward from that. So, like, I tend to start at the beginning just because I think linearly, I think chronologically, but you could start from the end, and a lot of people actually do this. They have exactly how they want the book to end, and they work back. I even have a friend who works through the story, like, random, and she's like, she goes from the climax to the inciting incidents to the end to the beginning, on like throughout the book, seemingly at random, placing scenes in. But really, what she's doing is she's saying, okay, I have a concrete idea here, and I know how I'm going to connect it to the previous thing I wrote, or I know how I can connect it to the next thing I'm going to write. And that's the key, is knowing the connections between specifically scenes, but also plot points, like the inciting incident and the conclusion. The inciting incident has to connect to your conclusion, even though the inciting incident's in the beginning and the conclusion's in the end. If the inciting incident does not have a place in the conclusion, then your story hasn't really gone anywhere, simply because of the fact that the inciting incident created the story goal for your character, and the conclusion is meant to resolve this story goal, reach it, or lose it. So that's something to think about as well. If you guys need help, like, connecting scenes and finding if you have plot holes in your story, feel free to contact me at www.facebook.com/DeannaLeeWrites. And this is confusing, I know, but the Lee is not spelled L-E-E, it's L-E-A-H. And I hope you guys will all go there. There will be a link in the description for that. But I'm here to help, and I'm willing to look for plot holes totally for free. But if you want more detailed sort of actual aid with your actual writing, it costs $7.50 per page for content writing, in which I will actually, like, change paragraphs and get in there and really help you rewrite your story. And so by that end of that, I will hand back to you a completely new draft with all of my changes tracked within it. That would be $750, and that is what I definitely recommend after you've gotten your first or second draft completed, just to make sure that there's no plot holes, there's no issues, there's no confusion. That would be a great way to do it, and I will always respect your wishes. You don't have to keep any of the changes I make. If you want to completely discard everything I did, that's totally up to you. But I hope it will be helpful to you guys to have someone else read your work and see the meaning that you had for it. Tell me your meaning, and I will try to expound upon that the best I can within the parameters of your story that you've set and that you've created and that this inspired you. And so then next, question, what is a subplot? Subplots can be kind of confusing. I kind of have an issue trying to figure out exactly what a subplot is, but that's kind of because subplots come to me naturally. Subplots are really just an underlying story that flows along with the main story that you've already created. And now subplots, you might not have to completely create a whole new storyline for them. You could sort of just insert them in, or even just make it up as you go along. But I found that when doing a subplot, subplots usually enhance the meaning even more than the actual main story does. So I would recommend paying a lot of attention to your subplot. Sometimes subplots stem simply from characters, where a subplot could be there's this main character with his story and then this other character with their story that connects to theirs. Or subplot could be this is the main thing that's happening in the world right now, but there's also this other little thing that's happening that influences the meaning. And so this is kind of interesting where it kind of gets into analogy a little bit. And like I said before, all stories have meanings. And not all stories are necessarily analogies that depict a real life situation and try to solve that issue. Usually analogies are just a picture of the author, which is why I think so many people don't end up writing what they were planning, because they're afraid of what people will think of them or what they will find in themselves. And if this is you, I really hope you will contact me. I want to hear your ideas. I want to be able to encourage you to reach for that story and to grasp it for all it's worth, because the world needs your stories. The world needs more people who are willing to be fearless and share what they believe and share who they are, because the world doesn't change if we're all just robots. And if you don't embrace who you are and what you're going through, then you're just a robot. And so as a writer, I hope you will spread your wings and set flame to your passions through your writing. Finally, method. As I said, you don't have to do like a full entire outline. Usually what I do after this point where I've kind of looked at possible subplots and story details and stuff like that, like meaning wise, is what I do is I type up just a little idea about them. So like I'll type what my meaning is. I'll type ideas for subplots to keep in mind, and I'll plot the most important concrete details that I've discovered that I want to add, and how they would connect to the different parts of the story that I've already made that are just core components of the story that are necessary in every story. But then I usually just begin writing. I don't really need like this scene and this scene and then this scene, and that creates the introduction, and then these scenes create this, and then this is how many scenes will be in the middle of the book before the climax and all this. That is great, and if you want to do that, that's absolutely great, because usually that will really reduce how many plot holes you have after you finish your rough draft, and anything confusing is usually eliminated by writing scene by scene and looking at your scenes before you start writing them in prose. So then, let's see. There is a slight warning on that, though, on the pre-writing your story and creating it scene by scene before you actually type it up, is that your story is going to change. Characters have a mind of their own. They are going to take your story and run with it. So going that detailed might be a little frustrating if you get into your story and it goes kablooey. I actually had that situation when I was writing Zangorlia for NaNoWriMo in 2012. I went into so much detail when I was planning that story, and I ended up so frustrated because it wasn't going the way I planned. But if you kind of tone down the detail that you go into just a little bit on like the sequence of events in your story, and you kind of just hit the main points, the fluff will fill in itself. You don't have to detail every little like word your character says before you start writing. That will come by themselves. Your characters will create themselves as you write. And since you already have a concrete foundation of how to make deep characters, they'll be great characters that stay with your readers for a long time. So I have a couple questions for you guys. The first is, what do you do before you write your story? If you've never written a story before, this could be like, what do you do before you free-write a fictional situation for class, or something like that? Do you just dive into the story? Or do you go into super crazy detail, like scene-by-scene sequence like I was just describing? If you have tried both of those ways, just diving in like a pantster, or doing sequence by sequence like a outliner, which one turned out better? Which first draft did you appreciate more? Was there one that you didn't finish? I would love to hear your guys' stories. I would love to hear all about like your plans and your ideas. If you are interested in what I think about your ideas, and if I think what genre your book is and stuff like that, feel free to message me on Facebook. Like I said, the link to that will be in the description. Love you all. Have a great day, and come back again next week for the next segment in this series.